not always.
They just added that. Sorry, guys.
A shift does not always mean a crash. The shift means there's an element of a shift, whether it's an economic shift, a supply shift, a demand shift, something shifts. And there's a lot of things that could be a shift, but regardless of what causes a shift, is we have to be aware of what it is, recognize it, see the pattern of it, make a prediction from it, and adjust our businesses and the conversations we're having around our business. So that's going to be the focus of our conversation today, is saying we're not going to draw major blanket statements around the market. And you guys are probably seeing this from your clients right now, is that one statistic on its own does not a whole story tell. The problem is the consumer right now, though, is hearing one statistic from somewhere, whether it's from Fox or CNN, their hairdresser, their nail, whoever it is, they're getting one statistic and they're making a huge blanket statement around our market. And it's our job. This is where we really get to shine and show our professionalism as real estate agents. And this market's going to be the separator. And what I mean by the separator is the professional agents that really should be in business and bring a specific value to the client are going to shine. And the agents that have kind of been just riding the wave and haven't been, really aren't showing up as professionals are going to be exposed in this marketplace. This is a skill-based market. And the number one skill that we need to improve on is how do we, instead of waiting for the consumer, and Jesse and I were talking a little bit about this earlier, instead of waiting for the consumer to bring us a question, which we've done historically, a lot of times they don't know the question to ask, or a lot of times the question they are asking isn't really the underlying question, is we need to take the question to them and get them to a new place, open to new information, and re-educate them on the market. And it's in that moment that they're going to be able to make the right decision specific to their family, whether it makes sense to buy, sell, or invest in real estate. So,
let's see if it's working now. Is it not working?
Will you go to the next slide? I don't know why this isn't working. So the one thing that I want to be really clear, this is the premise and the thought with the presentation today, is the market doesn't determine if we will succeed, but the market does determine how we will succeed. So a lot of you only know one market. A lot of you have been through several markets, but I will tell you, I've been doing this for over 20 years. I've seen a lot of different markets in a lot of different states. And I will tell you, in every market, there are people that succeed, and there are people that fail. And right now, one of my biggest pet peeves in the market right now is I get calls from agents, and their first comment is, "This market sucks. I hate it." I'm like, well, okay. And you don't control the market, but you control how you show up in the market. And you can either get into a real space of negativity, if this is harder, it's harder to get my clients to the house, we have to do offers the way we've never done them before. And you can get into that pity party and spend a lot of energy on that. Or you can take that energy to say, the market is what it is. There still is a need in the marketplace. Can I shift my energy, instead of going into victim mentality, into providing a solution? Yep.
You know, you mentioned something here, and I'm saying this for the newer agents that have come on board. And you said, this market will show the people that are going to succeed and the ones that are going to fail. Being and seeing different markets, I can tell you that when a market shifts, an agent or team who you thought they're dynamite, they're the number 1 or 5, top 10 agent in the area, and all of a sudden they didn't shift with the shift. And they're instantly gone, and they're now working at Walmart or some other place because they're doing something else.
Yep.
And you go, I never saw that coming. I never thought XYZ agent would, so.
Great point.
I'm just saying.
An agent's social media thread does not necessarily reflect the true health of that business, right? Would we all agree on that? Even though sometimes we look at it like, man, if I could just be that person, and they're laying in bed at night, and like, what am I going to do? My business is crumbling, right? So the point that I want to make with this is that just because the market shifted, that doesn't determine whether you're going to succeed or not. It's you showing up to say, who do I have to be to provide the best solution in this market, and that person will win. And to your point, I think some of the top names in real estate, even here in Washington County, that you're going to be talking about in the next 4 or 5 years, may just be getting into business, because they don't have to unlearn old habits. They're going to walk into a market and be like, I'm just going to create my business. This is the market. This is how I do it. And I saw this in 2008, 2009, 2010, when a lot of people were crumbling out, and that was a true crash. But the people that came into business at that time were like, well, this is just how business is done. and they thrive through it, right? I'm going to keep trying this thing, but.
I think it's because of the screen share.
So what we're going to do is, as you guys know that have been to the quarterly market update before, what I like to do is kind of start on a macro level, because even though here in beautiful little St. George, we have our own little economy and ecosphere here, it still is impacted by what's going on a grander scale. Sometimes it just shows up here a little bit later, which we can use that to our advantage because we can see it showing up in other markets, and we can make shifts and moves earlier. So I want to start on a macro level. I'm going to talk a lot about what's going on in the country, specifically in Utah, and then we'll get granular with some specific activity going on here in Washington County. So a couple interesting things. This was a recent article that came out by Wallet Hub, but it isn't necessarily talking about the strength of the economy, but where the biggest opportunities are for real estate agents. And I thought it was really interesting that Salt Lake was number 4 from the perspective of where do agents perceive as the biggest opportunity to grow an agent-based business. And being on that list is a big deal, that agents across the country are saying, hey, if I was going to choose a place to build my real estate business, that's one of the top places. So we have a ton of opportunity here in the state. Let's go to the next one, Robert. I'm just going to have Robert be my clicker today. Yeah. So really, we're gonna break our conversation into 3 pieces today. One is about affordability. So we're gonna break down affordability and what that really means. And I talked about increasing the skill set of having better conversations and opportunities. This to me is probably the most important one. If you can't have a conversation around affordability, you are going to miss a lot of opportunity in this marketplace. So opportunity is going to be one leg of the conversation, or excuse me, affordability is going to be one leg of the conversation. And then a lot of times we group supply and demand together into one piece. We're going to look at them separately today of what is going on with supply and what is affecting that, and what is going on with demand and what is affecting that. Because they both are unique conversations in themselves, and then you pull them together and see how they're interacting. So this graph here for the country is really interesting. It shows the home affordability in the US. Now we know that across the country, the median price is a little bit different in different marketplaces. But what this shows here is
couple things.
Couple things. So it's a little bit of a noisy graph. And by the way, anyone that signs in, or I don't know how you want to do the sign-in sheet, but we'll get these slides out to everyone. But if you look at what this is median, new home price, and percentage of households who can afford it. So remember, affordability isn't about the price tag that's hanging on the door. Affordability is, can someone afford to buy this in that marketplace? And so if you look at Utah, the percentage of households who can afford to buy in Utah is 40%. Now that number doesn't necessarily seem very high. For instance, if I came home from school with a 40% grade on a science test, my dad would whip my butt because it's not very high. But in relation to what percentage of the population, remember a total population is man, woman, child of every age, right? It's saying 40% of the population can afford to buy in our state right now. But if you look at a lot of what's going on across the states, 30, that one's hard to read, 32, 30, 30, 30. So there's a much smaller percentage in a lot of these places, 33 up in Oregon, 25, 26 in Washington. We're really ahead of the curve on how big of our population can actually afford to buy in our marketplace, even at today's prices. And there's a couple things that are affecting that, which we're going to dive into, because if we would have kept the other elements of affordability in check, that would not be the case. But the 3 pieces of affordability are moving together.
So did I hear you correctly? That that's total population of children too.
Yep.
That's actually pretty impressive when you consider our average home children per home are a lot higher than other states.
Yeah, it is higher than the average, but it's also, we see that decreasing in the state of Utah too, because the demographics of Utah are changing significantly. Because one of the biggest things, and we're going to hit on this a couple times, is right now in the state of Utah, 1 in almost 2 buyers is an out-of-state buyer. Right? That's one of the reasons our demand is so high right now.
So, Mark, so you're saying that 40% of the population of Utah can afford to buy a house?
Correct. Yep. And so that's one piece of the story, but the rest of the story here is that's a much bigger population than almost any other state in the country. There's only a couple states that are beating us, but barely. You look at Nevada, 42%, North Dakota, 42%.
Look at Denmark or Delaware. Denmark. Delaware. Yeah, geez. Yeah, Delaware's killing it.
Yep. So you can see that in a lot of places, it's a smaller percentage of the population can afford it. Let's go to the next slide. Actually, you know what? Go back 2 slides real quick. One more. One more. Okay, sorry, we're missing a slide in there. Will you undo this real quick? There's an important slide I want to show that must be hidden. Scroll down, that one. Oh, it is actually the next slide. They got out of order. Okay, start it back up on that.
This one?
Yep, start right there. So let's talk about what is affordability real quick, because right now, how often are you hearing this blanket statement? This moves. The market's no longer affordable. Homes aren't affordable in St. George. Every day, right? So what are they really saying when they say that? They're saying prices are high, right? They're not saying it's unaffordable, even though the general public and truthfully, the general population of agents use those as the same term. They think affordability and price are the same thing. It's only price plays 1/3 of the equation of affordability. So what are the other 2 pieces of affordability? Median income and interest rate, right? It's affordability is how those 3 things come together in any marketplace. Okay, so let's you click this so the animation happens. Let's look at this for 1 second. So if you look historically here, this shows you month over month what the affordability index is. Now, just to give you some perspective here, an affordability index of exactly 100 suggests that that market is perfectly affordable. Meaning that, click one more, meaning that at today's interest rates and today's median income, 30% of that income is exactly what you would need to make a mortgage payment at today's median priced home. That if you take 30% of the median income, you make a payment on a median priced home, and there's excess left over, would mean that there's over 100 affordability. If you take 30% of the income and you go to make a payment on a median income or median priced home, and you don't have enough, then it would say that it's under 100. So under 100 would suggest that you're now becoming an unaffordable market. Over 100 means you're an affordable market. If you look back in 2012, if you go back to 2012, look, the highest we got was about 187, which was an incredibly affordable market. But at the time, because the reason it was so affordable is a lot of people were ditching out on their properties because of what happened back here. And then it became affordable, and then people finally realized, oh wait, this is affordable. We should start buying again. And we've seen it trickle down all the way to right now. We've been bouncing along at 100. You can see the 12-month average is a score of 96, which would suggest that we're just creeping into that unaffordable marketplace. Now let's look at these individually. I'm going to ask a stupid question. Median priced home, what has it done over the last year? It's gone way up, right? So when median prices of home goes up, does that make things more affordable or unaffordable?
Less affordable.
Less affordable. Interest rates, what have interest rates done?
Gone down.
They've gone down, little bumps, but for the most part, interest rates are the lowest they've been, in most of our lifetimes, right? You look back at 2007 when we were last time we approached the affordability line. What were interest rates in 2007, 2008? 6-7%. So they were more than double what they are now when home prices were about the same or just a little bit less than what they are now. But because interest rates were much higher, it was even more unaffordable at that time. The last one is median income. Has median income gone up or gone down? This is one that I'm actually really excited about in the state of Utah because prices have shifted and we've seen interest rates shift, but for a while, the median income in Utah stayed pretty stagnant, but it's finally moving. So let's break this down and look at these individually. We go to the next slide.
Do we want to go back one or no?
No, actually do go back
that
one.
state one.
Yep, thank you. Go back one.
Getting there.
So let's look at median income right now. So this is, when I first saw this graph, it made me like a little sick to my stomach because it looks like the periodic table from science class. And I hated science. Like that was the worst. I got horrible grades, but it's not a periodic table. What it is it shows where the median income is by state. And you can see Utah sitting right in here is actually finally climbing into one of the higher median incomes in the country. So we used to balance it. This is the long-term trend of what the median income was. And this is specific to Washington County. This is specific to the state. But you can see historically, we had some increase and then we flattened out. And if you look at the one for the state, we even stayed flatter for a while. You can see in Washington County, we stayed pretty stagnant from 2010 to somewhere in about 2012. And we're finally starting to see that go up. So from your perspective, why now? Why now is the median income going up in the state of Utah and particularly in Washington County? Jesse?
Because there's so much competition for the money. The employers that are hiring are having to offer more money to get people to come to work.
Okay, so there's demand on employment, right? That's one.
Interestingly, I think people are coming here and working from home and bringing the income they had in another place here. So that pushes our income up.
This is a huge piece for the entire state where Utah has been a destination for a lot of people vacation-wise for a long time. And it's been on a lot of people's radar of someday I want to live there. Well, COVID accelerated that for a lot of people where a lot of the biggest companies in the world now are like, our people have been doing fine working from home. Why are we spending all this money on big buildings? And so they're letting their employees choose where they live to increase their quality of life, but they're bringing the job with them and they're bringing the income with them. So this is one of the biggest things that's pushing income up in our state, where you can see that based on across the country, we're sitting at about $71,000 as a median income, which is significantly higher than what it's been in the past. So this has been a huge piece of what's kept up with what's going on with affordability in the state of Utah. Now, there's really two things we got to look at. And I mentioned that 1 in 2 buyers are coming from out of state right now. That buyer coming in perceives affordability in our marketplace significantly different than a Utah homegrown buyer. Would we agree with that? For example, where are a lot of buyers coming from right now? California. So for a $600,000 property in California, does that look significantly different than a $600,000 property here in Washington County? So they literally walk in and they're like, wait, I get all of this and the yard? This price, right? When they're coming from like a 1-bedroom studio condo or whatever for that same price. So their perception of value is different. However, later that day, you could bring a buyer, a Utah homegrown buyer into that. And what's their comment around the $600,000 price? My dad bought this condo in 1989 for $42,000. There's no way I'm paying $60,000, right? So it's all about perception. And what we need to learn with the conversation around affordability is they're going to make a general statement around affordability in our marketplace. And what you need to do is take them back and identify the statement you just made. Does it have to do with interest rates? Does it have to do with median income? Or does it have to do with the pricing of the home? Because if I can pull you back to agree with me on one of those three, then I can introduce the other 2 elements into the conversation of what affects affordability. And I've in essence taken you from what you just thought was a reality to a place that you're open to a new perception. I can educate you. That's where our value sits. Your value is not access to the properties through the MLS like it used to be for a real estate agent. Your value is the education piece. You have to get them to a place of being willing to be educated, and then you create a new reality for them. But it's really important that we learn to say, instead of just agreeing with the blanket statement, is, okay, is what they're saying really a reflection of price, income, or interest rates? And can I introduce the other 2 into the equation? It's going to change their perception around affordability. Let's move forward with 2 slides.
Hey, Marcus, I throw a comment there.
Please.
That perception is so real. Tell me if anybody else does things like this. When I say every day, I mean every day. I even remember the house yesterday. I get on the MLS and I get angry. I'm like, are you freaking serious? This house is 600. Am I the only one? Like, I'm really, and guys, this is what we do. And I'm like, this is bullshit. Like, I get so mad. Yesterday, I remember the house. I was so mad. Like, you can't be serious. But that's how deep it is. And maybe that's helpful as we deal with locals. Think how deep it is for us. Just like double it, right? For them, they're really mad.
And I think this is a really important point, because it's really easy for us to get frustrated around it, just like it's easy for us to get frustrated on the market. But it is what it is. But if they see a Jeremy Larkin freaking out about it, and they're already concerned about it, what's their reaction?
They're gonna freak even.
I'm freaking out more.
Yes.
Right? So we need to understand the market. And I'm not telling you what to believe, but I'm here to show you what I believe to be true about the Utah market and why there's some sustainability. Some things need to change, but a lot of our clients are making the claim of, well, yeah, last time prices were this high in 2007, what happened immediately after? So I'm just gonna wait, it's gonna crash, and I'll just buy it at a 40% discount in 6 months from now. But was there more that played into that crash than just the price of the home?
Yes.
A ton more. And if you take all those things and segment them and say, okay, well, let me compare lending standards then to today. Okay, let me compare median income then to today. Let me compare interest rates then to today. Let me compare the economic condition of the state then today. Let me compare the population then to today. And if you look at all those other things, you've got 9 or 10 specific statistics that support the pricing in the marketplace and one that's in question. Does that make sense? So if you look at this so we talked about income. Let's look at median sales prices. You guys see over the last several years, it's pretty amazing. 8% appreciation, 12% appreciation, 8%, 7%. Last year, a 13%, and we're on track for an even bigger double digit this year. Now, what does the federal government like to see as a healthy appreciation per year? So it's 3 to 4%. So there's arguments, different articles that go anywhere between 3 to 6%, but generally it's that 3 to 4% range. So when the government sees consistent appreciation above 4%, what is their protocol to get that back in control? They affect interest rates, right? So one of the things that we got to be aware of, does the government sit and be like, whoa, 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 look what's happening in Washington County. We gotta change interest rates because Washington County, little St. George, Utah had a 13% appreciation. It's time to raise rates. No, they make it based off the health of the entire country, right? And so are there places in the country that are still trying to economically figure themselves out? Definitely. Like we're experiencing a huge net in migration. There are a lot of states that are experiencing a huge net out migration and crumbling governments and things like that. And the government is watching all of that. So this is one of the things that's going to play in favor to us locally is we've got such a robust economy in Utah that we're going to reap the benefits of this not being shifted for a while. We'll see some small bumps and moves in the interest rate, but we're not going to see 5, 6, 7% interest rates again for a little while. I believe we will in our lifetime. Which, frankly, and those of you that came to the wealth building conversation this morning, this is one of my biggest concerns for my own kids, because by the time they come around to buying their first home, that starter home could be $500,000 and a 7% interest rate, right? So there's some concern around the future, but for a minute, we know interest rates are going to stay relatively low, and we're going to continue to push good, strong pricing quality in the state of Utah. Go to the next slide. This shows year over year. Then this breaks down the same thing, median sales price, but it goes month over month. So you can see the last graph showed you through the end of 2020, and this shows us through the end of April 2021. And my point is this, is last year we had a 13% increase year over year, and look what's happened over the last couple months. A huge spike in appreciation. So we're gonna actually outperform the appreciation most likely this year than we did last year, which could put us in that 18% potentially appreciation in 1 year, which is crazy.
Hey Marcus, I have a super important question. I cannot see the Wi-Fi password. Who's got it?
It's
WCBR Realtor, WCBR Realtor, all lowercase. WCBR Realtor, all
I was
lowercase.
too quick. I was going to tell him the password was Jeremy was late.
I know, man. Thank you. Okay, as you were.
As you were, thank you. So the point we're looking at here is this is a significant appreciation, and there is some truth that's not sustainable long term. And what affects that is at some point, buyers will say, we've had enough, right? And you've seen some buyers already say we've had enough, but it's not enough buyers saying I've had enough to affect the marketplace yet. Because if there's a line of 20 buyers and the one at the front of the line says I've had enough, what happens to the person behind them? Good, I'm up, right? And that's how it's going to be until all of a sudden if there's 20 people in line and all 20 of them say enough's enough, right? That's when we'll see a softening. Yep.
But that's what we're also saying, that massive increase is because all of a sudden sellers now, I've got plenty of family members that are telling me this. I just got $100,000 or $150,000 or $200,000 equity in my house. I need to sell that now, so I can have that money in my bank account.
Yep.
And they're only looking at the selling equity in their house, not, oh, I still gotta stay in the area, now what do I afford?
Yep.
And it's one of those things where I think we've got sellers now, at least for me, that are saying, I'm willing to sell, but I know you just came in with the market analysis play, and I know this is the recommended value, but I'm gonna go peak at the height or even more, because there's people out there that will still bid 20, 40, 60,000 over my highest price.
So I'll touch on this real quick, but we're gonna talk about this more when we get to the demand section, because in my opinion, this is one of the biggest bottlenecks in our marketplace. There's two ways to create supply in a marketplace. One is build new product, or an existing product comes onto the marketplace. There's really no other way to create supply, right? Would we agree that those are the two ways?
Yeah.
Well, builders are going gangbusters. You drive anywhere in St. George, there's work going on, right? There's a lot of people that I think would want to sell,
Yeah.
but they don't see a path, right? They see on paper, I made a bunch of money. My net worth went up on paper, and I really want to go buy that. I want to sell this at top dollar, but I want to buy that at 2008 prices,
Yeah.
right? 2010 prices.
Or the sellers I'm seeing are saying, I can sell now because back in the day, I bought this over here, and now I can use that to build that house, or
Good.
maybe I'm moving to a different state that.
Yeah. So this is, again, going back to the skill-based market, is we have to listen, and we have to pull back and say, okay, what is the objective? What are we trying to accomplish? Now let's look at our options. Let me counsel and guide you, and you're going to make a decision. But what I don't want to do is make a blanket decision based off one statistic. Okay.
One thing I'm seeing right now is some kickback from the builders not wanting to pay the prices of lots. Our lots are significantly lower in amount, and the prices are way up, and they're sitting on the market. They're just not selling. And we're running out of land here. I don't know exactly how it's all going to play out. But guys that are willing to pay $250 for a lot are building an $800,000, $900,000 house. So the days of the new $500,000 houses are almost history. Unless you're in a project like Desert Color, where you were able to buy tons of lots and still keep the prices down with the little postage stamp now.
So I'm going to talk in a couple minutes around where builders are showing up as partners and where builders are actually working against us right now. So we'll talk about that when we get to the supply piece. So we're going to put a pin in that in a second and circle back. Let's move to the next slide. So we're already at 380,000 this year. Interest rates, we all know the interest rates came down. We had a little tick, they've softened. We imagine, we predict they're going to stay fairly low for the next little bit. Let's go next. So let's shift and talk a little bit about supply and demand separately. So everybody knows the basic economics of supply and demand, right? If I asked one of you to come up and say, hey, graph where we are right now in relation to supply and demand, we would say, is demand high or is demand low? High. So demand's high, we're sitting right here. Is supply high or low? Low. So we're sitting over here, meaning prices are high because demand's up, supply's low. We have a ways to go to catch up on supply. Okay, so let's break these individually and look at them separately. Go to the next. So again, going back to the idea, there's two ways to create inventory in the marketplace. It's create new product or get people to come on the market. Let's talk about building permits for a minute. In Washington County, you can see year over year the number of permits that were issued. In 2020, the most permits ever in St. George were issued. And we're a little, through the end of February, we only have statistics through the end of February, we're about 30% behind, but there was a little bit of uncertainty of what was going on at the beginning of the year with the election and the end of COVID. Are things going to start opening up? And we're starting to see that activity pick up. Now, one of the things we can predict with building permits is, when is the building permit issued?
Yeah, after the lot's been done and when they get the go ahead to pour foundation start.
Architectural's done.
This is a dwelling permit. So this is when the city says, yep, go vertical. So is there something going on in town that can help us predict if there's going to be more dwelling permits issued? I see a bunch of yellow equipment buzzing around town, right? Yeah, all that excavation work has to happen before those building permits can go. So we can kind of predict, like, hey, there's more coming down the chute. You look at Desert Color with 10,000 sites out there, plus they have the other side of the freeway, right?
South side of Hurricane. So out McRae, you can talk to that a little bit on how many developments. It was funny because I just got up on Tech Ridge, And you just start looking out and you're like, oh, over there and over there and over there and over there. And you can just start counting how many developments are actively being moved with dirt right now. It's crazy.
That being said too, have any of you ever developed land in the room? How basically right now, how long does it take from me saying, okay, I'm going to control a piece of ground, I'm going to design the piece of ground, I'm going to get permits, I'm going to get all the way through my due diligence, I'm going to close on the ground, then I'm going to line up financing, then we're going to start the construction work, then I got to wait for the contractor to stop those other projects, come over here. I mean, you're generally a year, 2 years before those lots even hit, right? So we have this long trackway of lots showing up. That is a positive indicator, particularly here in Washington County, is we see this runway of a lot of lots showing up that are going to help, but it doesn't fix the problem tomorrow, right? So this is one thing to look at. The other thing to consider with this is working with some home builders is difficult right now. Some home builders are very realtor friendly and some of them are not, and some of them historically have been. And those of you that had the run from 2005 to 2007 knows that a lot of home builders that at that time that were historically really friendly with realtors all of a sudden saw like, well, why am I paying you? We don't need you, right? And all of a sudden they turned to where like, well, we don't want to pay you a commission. We want to keep the commission. And we're going to see some builders, and some are already making that move of switching, right? Of like, nope, we pay 1%, we pay 0.5%, or whatever it is, where they're trying to capture that commission because their margins are getting slimmer on because of construction costs, right? So they're doing everything they can. And then when the market crashes, they come back and they want to be best friends again. So one of the things that I think is really important for us to do as a realtor community is identify which builders are being realtor friendly, and we should lean back into those relationships. As an example, not as a punishment to the other ones, but just be like, hey, we're in this together through the highs and the lows, right? They need to see the value of who we are as agents. And I think it's important for us to identify who are those good builder partners for us in the industry. And that's not a KW thing. I think that's an industry-wide thing we need to work on personally. Let's go to the next slide.
Maybe.
There we go. Interesting to look at what's going on across the rest of the state. Washington County through the end of February was third of the most building permits of all counties in the state. Utah County is going gangbusters right now, 1,731. Salt Lake County right behind that. But the population in Utah County and Salt Lake County are significantly higher than Washington County. So per capita, we're doing more building permits per capita in Washington County than any other county. Next. This is one that I always find really interesting to look at. And sorry, they're small. They'll show up a little bit better when we print these out for you. But I always like to look at what's happening with building permits versus population, because this is where supply and demand intersect a little bit. Interesting enough, look what happened if this is building permits in Washington County, 2002, 2003, 2004. Look how many building permits were being issued at that time. And then ultimately what happened right after that? The market crashed and builders were like, cities were like done, nobody's building. What's interesting though, if you look at 2007, 2008, 2012, when you come down and look on the graph down here for population growth, well, no one told people to stop moving into our state because we're not building new product. In fact, we grew at the fastest rate we've ever grown through that same segment that we weren't introducing new product to the marketplace. So we way overcompensated. So one of the biggest things that we need to grab onto and understand in our business is COVID did not cause our supply problem. We already had a supply problem in Utah and in Washington County. What COVID did is it threw fuel on the fire, right? So we were slowly making progress on catching up on supply, and then COVID hit and caused this problem, and then a lot of people came in, which I say problem, but there's really a lot of opportunities with that. But the biggest thing I want to articulate to you is do not come to me and say, man, I can't wait till the market's back to normal next month or in a couple months from now. People aren't wearing masks as often, so the market's going to go back to what it was. That's just not going to happen. What I want you to grab onto is the market of yesterday is gone. And from my perspective, this is a 5 to 10 year play for us to normalize the supply and demand in Utah. We're that far behind on supply.
Dave, think about factors in here is not only just the drought, but the water supply for Washington County is drying up along with Lake Powell and Lake Mead. We're not getting any runoff and more water. We're going to end up having a limited supply of can come here and build new, but it's gonna make the existing homes just go straight up.
This year particularly, because this year is anticipated to be one of our biggest drought years in a while, right?
100 years.
Where over the last several years, it's kind of been on the back burner. People be like, yeah, we're gonna have to worry about water someday. It's gonna become a bigger piece of the conversation this year, right?
I don't think we're gonna get the pipeline, you know, they say we're gonna get the pipeline, and if we do, is there gonna be any water left in Lake Tyler?
Well, something also that we like to do this, right? As we like to be like, hey, it's going to do this and we're going to continue to do this. And then the faucet could get turned back on, right? Next year. And all of a sudden we have a heavy rain year. What was it, 2 years ago where we were at 110% snowpack and every reservoir was full? Gunlock was spilling over, hadn't spilled over in 7 years, right? So we can go through these reactions of saying, oh, we're going to go into a drought and nobody's going to come here. We're not going to get the Lake Powell pipeline, which is like this knee-jerk reaction to when there's problems, right? So we want to hesitate and say, what can we control? What are we looking at? What are things we can realistically anticipate? Do we think the population growth is going to go up? That's pretty realistic, right? So holding on to some of those more tangible things, I think is important.
And I think there are going to be some decisions made around water,
and
the government's very aware of a water problem, and they do 100-year studies on water, right? So the cities wouldn't be issuing the permits if it was an immediate threat on long. They wouldn't be like, oh, well, we're going to take away all these people's houses because you were here last, so you don't get water anymore, right? They're thinking through that, but the long term, because we're playing a long-term game, right? It is an issue in St. George that we need to keep our eyes on.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting to the population, even another huge tick. We had a tick here, and now we're really ticking again here. And we're going to continue to see that. Because where Washington County really wasn't on the radar as a residence for a lot of people, it is now, just because of the changes in the world. This graph shows fastest growing states in America. You can see Utah is number 3 from the fastest growing state. This is by percentage. And it's interesting to look at, you look down at other areas of where else is growing. Texas is number 2. Interesting, North Dakota is number 1, but no surprise to us with some of these places that people are moving out of. Let's go to the next slide.
That's because there's only 20 people in North Dakota.
That is cold.
It's like, if you look at Wayne County, they've sold 800% more homes this year than last year. Meaning they did 8 homes this year instead of 1 last year. So this graph is interesting. Where did Americans move in 2020? So it's interesting to see where people went. Now, notice Utah is number 17, but as a population per state, we're actually have a lower population per landmass than almost any other state. We're growing significantly, but where we were the 3rd fastest as a percentage growing, we were 17 in number of people moving to Utah, right? So we can't, it's important to know it's either per person or percentage. But the interesting to see, this isn't a surprise of where people are moving out of, right? So the question that I would pose to all of you from a business perspective right here is, if there's a huge outmigration in several states, and Utah tends to be one of the top places they're looking to come, meaning 1 in almost 2 buyers are coming from out of state. I would ask you to say, pull out your database, and in your database is 50% of your prospective people in your database outside of Utah and 50% in. And I would dare venture that the majority of people in your database right now are all Utah-based people, and particularly Washington County-based people. And by saying that's okay with you, ultimately what you're saying is, I'm limiting my buyer opportunity by half this year. So we talk about getting specific with different lead sources. One of the things that I would challenge you to do, and I think between Katie and Robert, we can do some additional classes on this, is one of the biggest powers we have as a brand is there's 180,000 KW agents in the country. And thankfully, all 180,000 aren't here in St. George. They're all across the country. And they've already built relationships with people that chose to work with them based on their brand. Yet they love that agent, but they're choosing to move out of that state and come to places like Utah. So is there a strategy using the MREA model to now connect with KW agents in other marketplaces, and specifically where we know people are moving out of, and becoming the referral partner and putting that referral partner on a 36 touch? An 8x8. And just as an example, what would be on that 36 touch of, hey, mountain biking season started in St. George. Here I am out with my family. Hey, boating season started. Hey, I noticed that you're in a freezing cold market. Look how beautiful it is in St. George in the middle of January, right? You want to be top of mind for them when their car's like, I'm thinking about moving to Utah. Oh, you're thinking about you moving to Utah? I know Jesse in St. George. Let me show you some of these pictures that he sends me. This is beautiful. Would you like me to get you connected with Jesse? To me, that's a huge opportunity we have being part of the brand, is connecting directly with the consumer instead of just doing an internet web lead. There's value in internet web leads, but keep in mind that about 20%, maybe 25% of all transactions route back to an internet web lead. Last year, 27 million leads were sold to real estate agents, and there was only 5 million total transactions that happened in the country last year. Okay?
Can you go back one more really quick?
Yeah.
Just because it's sort of number one for North Dakota.
I know, and then it also
And then
says
the
that
other
they're
one
the most
says-
outbound.
As a percentage.
Percentage of per capita. Remember that the population in North Dakota is very small.
So then the total number of people leaving, right? So,
And fastest growing has to do with what's being created internally too. And the other one is people choosing to make a switch of location, but that is interesting.
let me go to the chat box here for a second.
And then take me to the next slide.
Income, Mel, I'm sorry, I don't know where that one was from. Income.
So this is another piece that, what's that?
Oh, okay.
So here's another interesting slide that we asked the question, why are so many people coming to Utah? This is somewhere our government is showing up in a big way. This is 2021 state business tax climate. So you look at a lot of the companies that are choosing to call Utah home now, historically have been in San Francisco, some of these other big states or big populated areas, but not only was everything really expensive there, including labor, the tax advantages of doing business in that state were significantly less than doing business in Utah. So now that we have even more and more companies saying like, let's just build in Utah, let's move there. The other thing I didn't include in here is there was a report done that Utah actually creates some of the strongest workforce out of our colleges than any other state in the country. Meaning that we get a lot of people coming out of our colleges here in Utah ready to go immediately into the workforce. And so a lot of those employers, that's one of the things they're choosing to come here, saying, well, I can just move to their state instead of moving them out here and paying them a higher salary. Let me just move to where they're at and pay them a better salary, which is a good salary based on where they're at, right? And then they take advantage of the tax climate.
There's a reason why Kanye West is not really his normal demographic, but he's making easy there.
He's a country singer, right? So unemployment also plays a big factor into median income going up, but it's interesting to look at United States, we're at 6%. If you look back, and this is specific Washington County here, Washington County's green, US is this turquoise color, state of Utah is blue. Was interesting what happened last year when everyone was freaking out about what was going on in the country is the huge shutdown. Unemployment went way up and immediately started to recover. We haven't quite got back to where we were before, but we've had significant impact on it. The state of Utah is back to 2.9%. Washington County is sitting at 3.4%. It's interesting to me that Washington County, like if you look at Salt Lake County, Weber County, Davis County, they're actually beating the state of Utah average. They're pulling the average down, where Washington County is actually pulling it up a little bit. And one of my predictions around why that's true, what's that? Tourism's one of them. And the other one I would say is because our population is growing so fast here in a smaller populated area. So as a percentage of population, we're growing so fast, it's hard to create jobs fast enough, right? And we see that we were talking about a restaurant yesterday that like hired 7 new people and half of them didn't even show up because
Taste the Asia. Taste the Asia.
That sounds delicious right now.
It was good last night.
So the point I'm making is that we could look at this and be like, well, we're underperforming the state. It's really not a concern, but it's something to be aware of why, right? That's the best question we can ask around any statistic is, the statistic is what it is. Why? Why is it that way? What else plays into it? How do we understand that? The practice in those conversations around it. But that's pretty significant because there's a lot of places across the country. If the average in the country is 6%, that means there's a lot of places that are significantly higher still in unemployment than 6. Let's go next.
But there's so many people hiring here in Washington County. That's what doesn't
That's
make
what
sense.
doesn't,
Is
yeah,
that
people are choosing not to work.
Well, this will change with the economic stimulus package. I've had people tell me no on being hired because they're like, I make more money staying at home, right? Which is a problem.
Well, and I think this will all change due to our legislators cutting on the unemployment amount they're getting per week, because I've got many clients that are restaurant owners and hotel owners and just in general. And yeah, their employers are saying, yeah, I'm making more money staying at home doing nothing than going to work. And so.
Which that's the American dream, right?
But
That's what we talked about this morning.
Getting the money anymore, then they're gonna have to go back to work.
Yeah.
Plus, I think the median income that you mentioned before in Utah was, I mean, if you're a high school kid or whatever, trying to get a job at Walmart or a restaurant, you're making $8 an hour. Now these restaurants are at, I mean, In-N-Out was just at 13, I think right now, 13.50. Arby's is like 14. I mean, you're getting to that 13, 14 an hour range, and I'm like,
This is
gonna make it.
This is going to catch up across a lot of things. A lot of us are laughing at the memes right now of the guy with 2 pieces of plywood in the back of his truck and be like, oh, that guy's got a retirement plan, right? So we're talking a lot about lumber, but if you look across the board, inflation is coming, right? If they got to pay someone $20 an hour to make your crisp bean burrito at Taco Time, that crisp bean burrito is no longer going to be on the dollar menu, right? So it's this, you got to be aware of these things coming up because it's going to change consumers' buying patterns over time, right? The other interesting thing is we'll keep moving here, but kind of break this down. This is unemployment by industry. And it's interesting to see what industries, like it isn't a surprise that construction has increased their employment by 5%, right? A lot of people are in the construction industry making great money there. Where if you look at like mining is down, leisure and hospitality is down. Our industry falls under professional business services, is up 4.5%. National Association of Realtors is still reporting, even though our business is getting more difficult, it's still reporting more agents getting into business at a faster rate than ever before because they're like, well, if I'm getting a stimulus check at home, I may as well become rich selling real estate next month, right?
It's so easy too.
It's so easy. So we're going to see that one of the things we got to keep in mind is that might mean increased competition for a minute from a realtor standpoint, and how many of those people are actually going to be willing to do the activities to make it in this business? A very small percentage. So if we stay consistent with the activities, if we get more purposeful in running our businesses like businesses, we will eat up that market share. Because anytime someone steps out of the business, even if they have a small SOI of 5 cousins and 2 parents or whatever it is, someone's going to eat that up. And this person steps out and someone's going to eat that up. And this person steps out and someone's going to eat that up. But it's the person that's telling their story in a very systematic way. This is why we got to lean into the model more than we ever have before. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on specifically with the real estate market here in Washington County. This blue line shows active listings over time. Pending is red, pending listings over time. Now it's interesting, if you look at the same graph for Salt Lake County, Weber County, Davis County, in 2017-ish, we started seeing these lines cross every about February. They'd ride for a minute and then they'd come back. And then the next February, they'd cross again. And we never hit that in Washington County. It's one of the only counties in the state that didn't experience that. But as you see here in Washington County, this last year was the first time we've seen pending listings outpace active listings. Now, how is an active listing measured? So the question I'm asking is this, is a lot of times we look at this and we make the conclusion nobody's selling their houses. So an active listing is at any specific moment they take a snapshot of the MLS. How many active listings are on the MLS at any given moment? So when you list a home at $350,000 here in Washington County, how many days is it on the market? I should ask that question differently. How many minutes is it on the market? Right? So the point is if you put that home on the market in the morning and it went under contract at 1, and I decided to go pull this statistic at 2, that property was on and off, wasn't even included in the active listing piece. But at that point, it is included in the pending, because we're not selling the home in minutes, we're taking it from active to pending. Now the pending window is narrowing too. But you can see the number of pending listings is going up. So if you add at any given time, if you add over the last couple of years, if you add pending plus active, the summation of those two numbers has stayed close in the same window. And you can see that's still relatively true, even though active listings in April 2021 versus April 2020 down 81%. So this is from the consumer's perspective that isn't watching this, it's easy for them to drive down the road and be like, there's no sell signs. Nobody's selling their houses. Well, that's not necessarily true because a lot of them are getting sold before the post even gets put in the ground, right? So again, we got to understand, and we cannot buy into the public story. We've got to take the story to the public instead of letting the public drive that story. Pending listings up 54% from where they were a year ago. Let's move. Total units sold last year in Washington County, the most homes ever sold in Washington County, 5,460, up 14%. One thing to keep in mind here is this does not include any off-market deals. So anything that was not recorded on the market in new construction or for sale by owner is not included on in this number. Let's go next. This measures the same thing, units sold, but it takes us, that last one was year over year. This goes through month over month, and you can see again this huge spike of closed units over the last couple months is the number of closed units. We're on track to sell more homes in St. George this year than a huge record second year last year. Do you think that would surprise a lot of people that aren't in our industry? Do you think it would surprise a lot of people in our industry? Yeah, I think it would. Based on the number of agents that tell me like, no homes are selling, I'm thinking about getting a part-time job. There's more commissions being paid out this year than last year. The question is are you becoming a victim of the market or are you capitalizing on the market? Because there are agents on track to make more money this year than they ever did before because they're shifting with the market. If a market shifts, guess what that means you have to do with your business? Shift your business. Okay, let's keep going. So here's a couple of interesting stats. This is, anytime it's blue, this is from Utah Association of Realtors. They're really, really good about giving us statistics, but they're always a little bit behind. So this is through the end of April. A couple of interesting things to look at here in Washington County. New listings year to date is down 22.6%. Any thoughts on that number? How is it that closed sales is up 18%? The new listings is down 22. How could that be possible? Okay, so for sale by owners isn't counted in this.
So even though there's less listings in a normal market, you'll have 1,500 listings on the market at any given time. Well, now we have 400. So it's just the demand is eating up that inventory that usually sits on the market, 60, 90, 6 months.
Yep.
So I think another thing would be momentum, right? So going up into April. So when COVID hit, everything hit the brakes, right? So new listings continue to rise, but we hadn't really adjusted for demand yet. It was like May, June, July is when we started seeing things change. So we had all this heavy momentum moving into COVID, and when we hit the brakes, we hadn't seen it yet really hit in April. It wasn't until May, June, July, I think, that we started to see those number of listings kind of start to go down. But truthfully, listings never really slowed too much. Demand slowed down and then ramped up really heavy, right? So our listing inventory has always been climbing, but I think what you said there about eating it up instead of having new listings be posted, what would have been sold a month before might have been carried over, right? Is that what you're saying?
So I think that is part of it. You had a comment here?
Oh, I was just saying the reason it's higher is because, our inventory back in March of 2020 was 1,400 homes on the market. Now you look at it, we got 300 active listings. So I think a lot of that was chunked up, but I think everyone was still on the bubble in April of last year and May. We're like, oh no, COVID, everyone's shutting down. And then finally, when they realized in October, November, wait a minute, I missed the ball. I should have bought back in May and June. Now I got to buy in October, November.
Yep.
And all those closings are now hitting in January, February, March.
Okay, this is a big piece of it right here, is the timing from the new listing, because this isn't active listings, this is new listings. And then the timing, how long did it take to close? And we had a change of year right there, right? The other one is what is the long-term historical trend from a listing to sold ratio? The long-term trend.
Like from a listing to actually getting it sold, like how many of them actually get there?
Listing to sold ratio. Historically, out of 10 listings, how many would sell on a long-term trend?
No, I think it was
Opposite.
7, yeah,
Between 60 to
70%.
70% on a long-term trend would be a listing to sold ratio. Right now, in this market, what is the listing to sold ratio?
99.99999.
So across the state, it is close to 100. You'll see here in St. George is still below. But from the general public, they think 100% of homes, they think you can go down to your local AutoZone and get a for sale sign, a car for sale sign, put it in their yard, and it's going to sell for $200,000 over list price, right? So one of the things here is the listing to sold ratio is narrowing, which does suggest that it is possible to have less listings and more solds. And that's something we got to take into consideration. Pending is up 9.3. Okay, let's go to the next.
But then because of that 100% ratio where it was 70 before, that's where I'm also seeing the sellers are getting greedy and saying, now I'm going to raise my values, way higher than what it used to be. And I think what you said before is eventually over time, the buyers are going to sit there and go, I'm not going to pay $1 million value for a home that was 500,000 2 years ago.
Yeah, we have a lot of people just trying to test the market. Well, I don't really want to sell, but if I can get $300,000 more, then.
I will. Yep. We'll see some of that. We'll see some of that.
We'll see
Yes.
that.
So the buyers, it's the buyers, if they were, but the buyers would say would be.
Well, if it's
Oh.
It's just interesting. This one's across the whole MLS. This is across the state. So this isn't just Washington County, but I think it's interesting to look at what's going on. We saw that closed sales was what we're outpacing last year in Washington County. You can see that it's finally catching up across the state, though we're actually behind by 8.1% from where we were a year ago across the entire state. So some of that pressure we're seeing show up here in Washington County is a little bit of a different demographic. We're seeing more buyers throw their hands up in the air up north than we are here in Washington County. So it could show up regularly or shortly. Something we track it here is that we're outperforming the market. So this number over here is just that KW is outperforming the market as a brand, which is really important for us to track because, as you know, Robert and Katie and the team are constantly working on, okay, what do we need to talk about in team meeting? What is the most important thing for our agents to be competitive right now? And this is how we gauge if we're focused on the right activities. So if you're not already plugging into the trainings that we're putting together, now is the time to increase your skill set, and we're being very purposeful on those conversations. Robert, next. New listings we talked about, pending sales we talked about. Let's go next. I want to talk about this real quickly. If you guys remember a year ago on our internal Facebook page, we started posting every week how many new listings hit the market this week, how many under contracts, how many closed this week. Well, I thought that was really important because the market was shifting so fast that we needed to know in that moment. But really why I had the team start tracking that is because I wanted a year later to be able to say, well, really what's happening this week versus this week a year ago. Because even though, again, UAR is great about giving us data, it's always 30 to 45 days behind. And our market is moving so fast right now that we need the information on a week-by-week basis now. So it's really interesting now, and we'll continue to share this out. But now we've got over a year of data on this to show this is all of 2020 of exactly what happened every single week here in Washington County in each one of those categories. And now we're tracking it in 2021. When you click one forward so the animation comes up. And then it's really hard to see on here, but ultimately, go back one, I wanted to track that here and say, okay, well, May 4th, 2020, there was 168, does that say 168?
Yep, 168.
168 new listings, 197 under contract, 134 closed. That same week in 2021, 183 new listings, so we outperformed.
170
under contract, we outperformed.
We underperformed on under contract. Outperformed 171 closed.
So it's interesting now we can watch for a closer trend on a week by week basis of what's going on.
Yeah, so we're at 5 weeks in a row of growing inventory, new listings. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So looking at that, and then even the weeks prior before that, just barely different, where new listings and under contracts were about the same. Same thing 7 weeks ago, outpaced new listing 8 weeks ago. So you can see that the climbing inventory is outpacing what the demand is.
So one of the things, yes, this is a good conversation.
I noticed it too.
So-
Jumped up 100 last month.
So this is something we'll continue to post on the Facebook page. Remember, anything we're putting out there, it's not just like, oh, interesting, move on. What we're trying to give you is the data to go have the conversation. Like, it always cracks me up when it's like, well, I know I need to come with people, I just don't know what to say. Is it that you don't know what to say, or is you haven't done the research to learn what to go say, right? There are so many conversations that must happen right now. And it's not a, hey, how you doing? You need to buy or sell a house? Okay, I'll call you in a couple months. It's we need to go create the question and then bring the data to the table. This is why we're putting this information out there. Let's go next. So I thought this was interesting. This is across the state. Not specific to Washington County, but trending wise, they're pretty close. Because we've talked a lot about new listings and active listings, but what I want to look at here is this is number of residential listings entered, whether they were on the market for 2 minutes, 2 days, 2 months. If they were entered, it was recorded. And so one of the things to look at, this shows 2017 to 2018, 2019, 2021. And I specifically want to look over the last couple of years. You can see there's a very clear trend over the last several years, right? That's a pretty obvious trend. But if you look at 2020, which is one of the weirdest years in the history of the world, really, you look at what happened with residential listings entered. It went up. We were on track in March of last year to have the biggest year from a new listings entered, and we caught up. But what happened between March and April that caused that? Huge shutdown, right? The majority of the world thought that was the end of the world as we knew it, and there's a huge pullback. And there were still, you can see with some uncertainty that we continue to just a little bit underperform the market from new listings entered for the rest of the year. And that trailed down, and then we came into 2021, and that uncertainty carried into the beginning of this year. Well, the interesting thing is there's uncertainty, and then all of a sudden we started gaining certainty in the marketplace, where by April we matched where we were last year. So where it was declining and now we're inclining, we're actually crossing that line. And don't have the May stats yet, but I imagine we're going to show up somewhere right in here, which is where it needed to be. And we'll probably surpass that coming in if, and this is a big if we do what we're talking about today and say, I'm going to increase my skill set, I'm going to understand the conversations, I'm going to be the one that goes and takes the conversation to the client instead of letting them sit at home wondering what they should be doing. If we do that as an industry, we should start showing up somewhere in here and close the gap on some of that piece that we missed. And we're going to create some supply that way. Let's go next. If you look at this is active residential listings per day. So this is every day a snapshot of how many active listings there are that day. 2021, no, it's no surprise. This is hovering down here. We're 2021. We were doing this, and this is where the uncertainty showed up last year at this time, where we started saying, oh wait, the residential listings was up, and now we're sitting down here at a low inventory. Let's go next.
It's funny, it's got a heartbeat. We're gonna go like that.
Average numbers of active residential listings per day. You can see this is just a bigger scale of the same thing. Again, we're going down here, but look at what we're starting to do. We're starting to close the gap here. We're going to start seeing us increase the number of listings. Just a little bit of an increase of the number of listings coming on the marketplace is going to reinvigorate some of those buyers that are a little bit frustrated right now. Even though, again, we're at a 5 to 10 year run on that supply and demand issue, but just a little bit more supply coming on the marketplace is going to keep that invigorated in our market. Let's go next. Under contract residential listings per day, kind of the same story here. Let's keep moving. Interest of time. Total number of sold residential listings. 2020, again, when we saw that pullback last year here, we caught up by June. All of a sudden, we started showing up and closing the gap on the number of closed units. And again, ended the year with more closed units in one of the strangest years in the history of the world again. And then based on what's happening this year, we're on track to do it again in the state. This is specific to Washington County, the sales price versus list price ratio. When I asked you guys, what is the sales price versus list price ratio here, you all said 100%. 100% is that line up there. And you can see we're balancing on this 97. Now we took this little push up to about 98%. But if this was a bigger window, you could see that historically it's sitting closer to about 70% on a long-term trend. Over the last couple of years, it's been a little bit higher, but we are closing that gap again where we're sitting at about 98%, meaning that there's out of 100 people that list their home, there's 2 that are unsuccessful right now. Any thoughts on that?
Overpriced, probably.
Those two should go get a different job.
Or a different agent, right? Yeah, so and Jesse and I were talking a little bit about this before is.
That's a different question that I was answering. That's saying of 100 people that put their home on the market, how many of them don't sell?
Well, this is list price to sales price to list price. So this is based off of
excuse me.
What are they selling for versus what they were originally listed for. I think this is probably what the list price was before it sold.
Yeah,
So I don't
not
think
the
it's the original. It's not the original.
The last.
Yes.
It's the
So,
last.
I'm sorry, I was talking about a different slide.
Okay.
But again, looking at this though, the list price to sold price ratio, a lot of us think that that's over 100% right now, which it is true on a lot of listings. But to balance that out, this would suggest that some of them are closing below list price.
And this might be every residential sale too.
I think it is.
So that this isn't gonna, this is gonna include a lot of different data.
Okay, let's go to the next one. I'll just make sure this is included in the slides we send out, because again, even though 1 and 2 buyers is coming from out of state, it's really, particularly here in Washington County, a lot of buyers are coming from up north, right? They've planned to retire at some point to St. George, but they're accelerating those game plans. So it's important to know what county they're coming from. Where I made the comment earlier that Wayne County's up 700%. You guys should go buy a bunch of homes in Wayne County. Well, they went from 1 last year to 8 this year. That's crazy. But
And their price went down.
It's important to know what's going on in the other counties in the state because our economies are so segmented. It's really important to know. Let's go to the next. The next thing I want to talk about real quickly is the metro rents. So we talked a lot about what rents are doing, and one of the things that buyers need to understand when they say homes are too expensive. Well, rents are also increasing and very expensive. How hard is it to find rental properties right now?
Extremely. I've never gone, I went 1 month without one listing on my website because everything I did have coming up was rented through a phone call.
And we've had 5 rentals on the market this week and we're renting them in under a day because we received over 10 applications in on one property specifically.
And at high rent prices right now, right?
Extremely high.
So I think there's a couple important lessons to
But
learn
also
from
the
this.
most qualified tenants
Ever.
Yeah.
Really.
You have to be able to buy a house just for
So
rent.
Can buy a
it
home.
makes it tough for the unqualified tenants, right? Which means they're moving into worse properties because these qualified buyers are moving in and becoming renters. But there's a couple important things that I think we can learn from this conversation. One is when that buyer finally does get frustrated and throws their hands up in the air, it's our obligation to educate them around, well, it isn't like when you were in college and you're going to go get a house for $800 a month. Like you got to understand that rent prices are going up as well. And then also helping them understand what is the likelihood based on what we talked about today that the buyer landscape is going to look significantly better in 12 months from now when your lease is up. Because that's what they're not thinking. I'm going to become a renter for the rest of my life, right? They're thinking, well, let's go rent for a year. We'll let the market soften. Then we'll come back in and swoop up a property at 60% of the value of the property, right? So based on what we talked about today, what can we predict is going to be the buyer landscape in 12 months from now? It's going to be similar. So it may be a little bit more supply, but buyer demand will still be there. But let me ask you this question: a house listed or a house that will sell today for $400,000, based on what we learned today, what do we think that home's going to sell for in a year from now?
18% more.
Yeah.
So there's a high likelihood that home's gonna sell for even, say that the market does soften and it doesn't appreciate by 18% again, and say it's at 8% appreciation. What is 8% appreciation on 400,000? 432,000 or something like that, right? So then you can say, let me ask you a question. Would you pay an additional $25,000 for this house to get $32,000 in a year? So again, it's really helping them see by saying no to this, what are you saying yes to? And by saying no to this, what are you saying yes to? But part of the way we help people see things differently is we have to present things differently, right? A lot of times we go into just selling the market instead of selling what would that situation look like for you in a year from now compared to what do we predict the landscape's going to be in a year from now, right? Again, one of the points I'm hoping you take away from our conversation today is if you haven't honed in your skill set of consultation, and not just the listing presentation or buyer consultation, but consulting throughout the process, is we need to learn to ask better questions. We need to learn to listen better. We need to learn to listen to what is the real question or concern behind the question and dig those back. That is the #1 skill set I think that we need to improve as an agent base right now.
Hey Marcus, can I say something real quick?
Please.
Just because I think it's really important, I mean, for you guys, with your job, is helping them understand what renters are feeling at this point. And being a homeowner, at least you have security. And a lot of people up until the last year were good with renting because they felt like they had the control, and they have all learned this year that they don't have the control. And it's been really hard because investors have sold or rents have gone so high that they can't afford to rent. And so there is a lot, I mean, I can't tell you how many tenants call me that are like panicked about their rent prices and they have no control over it. And so they have lost all control in the decision of where your main thing that you pay for every month. And I think if you explain that to them, because I get a lot of calls of people, well, I'm just gonna rent for a year, but yeah, in a year from now, your rents could go up. We don't even know how much for that person could sell the home, or it's just,
We see that piece a lot where they're like, I'll just rent for as long as it takes. Well, a year from now, that investor's like, well, I'm gonna sell.
yeah,
So they're like, you have to get out.
yeah.
Where am I gonna go? Yeah.
So I would really stress stability, because everyone of my renters wants stability.
Yeah, I don't want to be uncertain. That's a huge uncertainty going on.
And they're feeling it.
The other big comment I want to make to this group, and I appreciated the conversation we had this morning with those of you that came to the wealth building conversation. But if interest rates are what they are and rents are going up, what happens over time with rents when inflation kicks in?
Keeps going up.
Rents continue to go up. What happens over time when you lock in a long-term interest rate to your payment? It stays the same. So one of the biggest things that we as real estate professionals, one of the things that we should do, I want to say must, not even should, is we should be capitalizing on any market and buying rental properties. Take advantage of the low interest rates, and then your cash flow increases over time. Your cash on cash return increases with inflation as rents go up and your payment stays the same. And at the same time, you're getting your principal paid down. I don't know if this isn't news flash to any of you, but I've talked to a lot of agents that either don't own property or they're like, well, I'm gonna wait till the next crash. Well, statistically speaking, I don't know that another crash is on the horizon. Correction, softening, yes. But I don't know if we're gonna see another crash in our lifetime the way we saw it several years ago. We can't put our whole financial future on hold waiting for that.
Well, that's waiting. That's literally waiting outside of the game, hoping to get, I don't know, this is a baseball analogy. You get a pinch hit, they bring you into the game. You're not playing at all. And all of a sudden they're going to bring you into the game for the home run hit. And you get one opportunity to do it, right? Are you going to be prepared by sitting out of the game for years at a time and not be ready to, pull the trigger when you can? It's better to be taking some singles and some doubles on sure things than it is going to be try to hit that home run, waiting for the market to change.
That's the majority of the buyers out there are thinking that.
I'll say for the Bitcoin.
So to that point, you said the majority of buyers are thinking that.
Should they?
Do we believe that to be true based on the statistics we talked about today? So whose job is it to go re-educate them? It's ours. Our job, we get this confused notion that as real estate agents, our job is to wait for them to call us, ask us a question, point to the house, I want that house. And I'm like, okay, I'll bring my paperwork. That is not our job. That's part of our job. That's actually a privilege of doing our job, which is educating, building relationships, figuring out what the question is, and educating them to make the right decision. Let's keep moving. So we only got a couple minutes left. I want to wrap up a couple things. So let's talk about kind of wrap up our conversation. So I bullet pointed a couple things that I just want to recap. Number one is, and we just talked a little bit about it, what does the consumer believe to be true about the current market? Because anytime you're building a product, and ultimately our knowledge is our product. The house is not the product. Our knowledge is the product. So we got to look at this and say, what is it that the consumers believing to be true, and is it really true? And how does that compare to what is really true? And how do I bridge a gap between what they believe to be true and what is really true? And then I'm going to take the conversation to them. If they're not asking the right questions, what questions should they be asking? And how do you meet your client where they are? Again, this is historically, so many of us have waited for our clients to come to us. Is how do we take the conversation to where they're at? Even if we know what they currently believe to be true isn't true, we've got to go there first. Grab their hand and lead them somewhere else. Okay, next. So real quickly on supply, one thing that's interesting here in Washington County, in Salt Lake County and Weber Davis County, it's 1 in 18 to 19 houses is gonna sell. If you take the total number of closed units in 2020 divided by the total number of households in Washington County, that means if you take your dog for a walk tonight and you count the 12 houses, 1, 2, 3, up to 12, you just walked by 2 sides of a commission. You walk by the next 12 houses, you just walk by 2 more sides of a commission. So this is an incredible statistic. Like, it blew me away when I pulled it. And so for any of you that are saying like, oh, there's just not as many homes selling, or my commission's down from what it was, you're walking by commissions every single day as you're either walking down the street or driving past homes. Literally here in St. George, it's almost 1 in 12 will sell this year. The other thing we need to do a better job of from a supply standpoint is and I think Robert is doing a really good job of helping connect this, is know what projects are coming up, and then really build, as a community, let's build better relationships with the builders so they stay friendly with the agent and understand the importance of an agent in that transaction. But we need to know what projects are coming up, where they're at the process, how far out the lots are, and work through those pieces. Next, Robert. From a demand standpoint, don't trade an unqualified or unfortunate buyer for a listing opportunity. One thing that we're seeing across the board right now is, I know that the majority of agents are working harder than they've ever worked before. The problem is they're getting more buyer leads than seller leads, and we're running buyers around town, writing 50 offers, and then that buyer's throwing their hands up in the air, and you're like, well, do I still get paid? Right? That's not how it works. But we've talked a ton about pre-qualifying buyers, which I think is true. But we also need to understand, is that an unqualified buyer different than an unfortunate buyer? And I would say that part of our process is we need to understand who just is an unfortunate buyer in this marketplace. They have a pre-qualification letter, but 5% down and no cash to pay over appraised value, depending on the price point, more than likely, they're not going to find something right now. And if you're just so committed to helping that person, even though they're phenomenal people and you want to get them into a house, by saying yes to showing them 40 homes they're never going to get, did you say yes? Did you say no to a few listing opportunities? Probably. So one of the things I want to pull into our conversation is identifying unfortunate buyers, not just unqualified buyers. And I know that might sound a little harsh, but I think it's an important piece of the conversation. How are you connecting with out-of-state buyers? We talked about that. Go one more, Robert. Click. Just know the Utah economy versus the national economy. Build your database. Again, this is so important. If you don't have a database, we got to lean into our database, be the expert, be the guy, connect early, connect frequently, bring value. Ahas from our conversation today.
Hey, I'll throw some out too, because some of my team are doing it, but just listen to sold calls, will used to be like the worst, stupidest, and time wasting calls you could ever make. They've never been as effective as they are right now because you're 1 in 12. Never. That 1 in 12 is a shocking number. There's the two numbers that shock me the most are the 1 in 12, and then Robert and I talked about this, that our $1 million plus sales went up 500% from 2019 to 2021.
Nuts.
So we went from 41 in 19 to 20 to 222 from 20 to 21. So the opportunity is crazy. And I know, I get it because they're sitting in the room with me. We do big, you know, we validate about these buyer office commissions being 2.5%. You gotta remember, guys, the sales prices are crazy, or even 2%. The opportunity right now is actually amazing.
The thing to keep in mind is it's an equal opportunity, unequal reward we live in.
Amen, man. Unfair share, right?
Every single agent that has the same license we do has the exact same opportunity. But why is it that some people are crushing it and some people aren't? It's because they're learning the skills of the market they're in and they're willing to do the work. That's what's going to set you apart, right? And what other ahas do we have as a group through this conversation?
I love the question. In fact, I have a couple of buyers I want to ask you this. By saying no to this situation, what are you saying yes to? And help them see what the future is going to be like for them if they try to wait. Because I have some qualified buyers that are unfortunate and they're feeling like they want to give up, but that's something to do.
The thing I love about that question is in sales, we learn about pattern disruption, right? Because what that's going to do is they're going to think, be like, wait a second, that wasn't a question I was expecting. They may not know how to answer it, but what you did is you just disrupted the pattern. And then you can say, based on the look on your face, I can tell you don't understand what I mean by that. Can I ask you some follow-up questions? Because a lot of times they won't be able to articulate it, but you just put them in a place where now they're open to it. Because if you went just into like, well, if you rent, this is what's going to happen, then they close their ears because they're like, you're telling me what to do because you want to get paid a commission, right? So I love the way you stated that question. What other ahas did you guys get today?
I love being ahead of the problem. And my coach is actually, that's his whole thing, is you get ahead of everything and you educate based on what you see is the problem, or not the problem or the education, or just be ahead of it so that they know that you're a resource of education.
Love it. I think that's such an important piece of what we got to be doing right now.
I think really talking about affordability and having buying power, right? So when we talk about, because if we're going to go get listing opportunities, what is the biggest challenge with getting a listing is them finding a house that they're going to go buy, right? So it's the buying side of it. And that goes right back to the affordability, right? It goes right back to having that smart conversation about affordability. Is it their income? Is it that the price they think is too high? Or is it interest rates that they just don't understand how those three things impact each other? And so I think it's a great conversation to have, whether you're talking to a listing or you're talking to a buyer. It's going to be important to get clarity with yourself around it so you can keep talking about it.
I think that's a great point. And one thing to keep in mind is the majority of buyer leads right now are listing leads in disguise. Because a lot of people that are sitting at home like wondering like, well, I would like to sell, but where would I go? They disguise themselves as the buyer to go understand what the buyer market looks like to make their listing decision. So are we treating every buyer lead just like a buyer lead, or are we asking questions to discover, are you really already a buyer lead, or are you first a listing lead?
I have 4 of them right now that want to buy and sell. So I'm working that tricky dance.
Nice.
It's a tricky dance.
This is great content because the coach that I'm working with is all about digital videos, creating videos and sending them out by text, and writing a script around all of this that we just talked about. And really, because Zillow is doing what it's doing, and we need to be doing digital marketing.
This leads perfectly into my challenge for you. As you get these slides out, what I want you to do is look at your notes. A couple things probably stood out to you. And then what you need to do is, it's not enough for you to be like, well, now I'm just going to send this 60 slides out to all my clients. They're going to hate that. What you need to do is say, okay, I'm going to go through a slide a day, and I'm going to role play a practice. How do I articulate this? And what solution does this solve for a client? And if you look around this room and in the Zoom call, we have some incredibly talented agents in our organization that want to get better with you. Pick someone you like and say, hey, for the next 2 weeks, can we meet for 15 minutes a day? And we'll just go from slide to slide. And I'll be the buyer, you be the agent. Then I'll be the buyer, then you be the agent. And let's talk specifically around this slide. And then you say, well, then how do I go tell that? Now I've practiced, and how do I go tell the story?
I should have brought more paper.
Okay, anything, Robert, anything else?
No, I think that's it, guys.
You
Thanks
missed
for hanging in
you
there.
missed the slide of Robert's on my podcast this
Oh, yeah,
week.
I'm on the podcast this week.
Be sure to listen to him. But thank you guys for coming.
Sure.
Okay, let's do it. See you later, guys. Thanks for jumping online. We'll get the slides out by the end of the day. We'll see ya.